Hello everybody, I'm here with Dharma teacher, Plum Village UK Dharma teacher, Michael Schwammberger. Am I pronouncing your name right, Michael?
Yep, that's correct.
Good. And I'm Karen, I'm the communications coordinator for Plum Village UK. And one of the nicest bits of my role is to get to interview very interesting people. And today I'm talking with Michael. Michael's, as I said, is one of our Dharma teachers here, a lay Dharma teacher, and he grew up on Ibiza in Spain, and originally started practicing the Dharma at meditation centres in the UK, including Gaia House and the Sharpham Trust in Devon and the Barn. And then at some point he read Thich Nhat Hanh's book Pieces Every Step, and that led him to go to Plum Village, and he met Thai there in 1996, and being very inspired by learning about the Plum Village tradition, he received ordination as a novice monk in 1997, full ordination in 1998, and then received the Lamb transmission in 2003. And he was also abbot of Sonha Temple in Plum Village for a while. And whilst he was a monk, he's now a lay teacher, but whilst he was a monk, he travelled extensively with Thai in his teaching tours across the world, and stayed in many of the centres around the world. And did quite a lot of work in the US. And since 2012, Michael's followed the path as a lay teacher in the Plum Village tradition, and working in the communities around the UK and also Spain, as I understand it, working with Spanish-speaking sanghas and supporting the wake-up community of young practitioners, and doing quite a lot of work around compassion and compassion practice in therapeutic settings as well, and facilitating for the Heart of London Sangha. Oh, that sounds like quite a lot. So I'm really pleased to speak with Michael today. We are filming this, videoing this, in week 5 of the lockdown in the UK, of the COVID-19 crisis. So part of the reason behind talking to Michael today is hopefully to get some of his experience and wisdom on how to make the most of practicing during the crisis, depending on what your circumstances might be. And so, Michael, did I introduce you with all the correct information? Is there anything you want to add or I got wrong?
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Good, great. Well, as I was explaining to our viewers or listeners, having had all this experience of being a monk, 15 years as a monk, and obviously lots of teaching, teaching many people from many different walks of life about mindfulness and compassion. Also something I read about how you describe it as heart-based living. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey into Buddhism and this idea of heart-based living?
Thank you. I think one of the first elements of my let's say my journey was suffering, the classical story of suffering, and having tried to follow the kind of general path that everyone follows, having a job, all those things and realizing at some point that that really didn't bring any happiness. I even went to Australia for a year and I did all sorts of jobs and followed all sorts of paths. And what it really boiled down to is that none of that really seemed to give me any answer to this kind of journey that I guess unconsciously I was looking for answers. So I could say that I kind of bumped into a retreat by chance, and that was really the first step in becoming aware that I could do something about what was going on inside. And through that, uh, starting the path of Buddhism in this sense, and in that kind of, that's how I started. And that's what really started the journey back in 1992. The interesting thing is that when I first went to this, it was a short retreat, a 3-day retreat. What I heard the teachers say didn't make any sense because intellectually I didn't know much about Buddhism. What it did make sense is to the heart. So I felt I didn't understand any of the Dharma talks, but in my heart, something kind of clicked. And I felt that was the first indication for me that that was the correct path. And it's not that I didn't have a sense of that wisdom or there was another way to live in more harmony, but nobody was talking around it where I grew up. So there was never confirmation that there is a path of transformation, there's a spiritual path. There was never any clear confirmation. So having been on this Buddhist retreat, it was like for the first time, it was that kind of confirmation. And that made a huge difference. So that's where I first started. It doesn't mean it was easy. It was not easy. But there was a big difference. The difference was that something was in my heart was informed. So I feel that's the difference. And I think many of us, when we arrived to Plum Village and we saw Thai for the first time and listened to one of his Dharma talks on the first time, it was this like a click, something this kind of opens up. And you know that there's a truth there. There's something that is being revealed, even if it feels mysterious and maybe far away. But you know there is something to that, and I feel that is the first steps in the journey.
Yeah. And what drew you into the Plum Village tradition specifically, would you say?
Mm. Well, I guess as you mentioned earlier, I read this book by Thai, Piece of Baby Step. The interesting thing, I mean, it was a translation. It was a bad translation from English to Spanish. I bought the book in Spanish, but somehow Thai's teaching, even the translation wasn't good, somehow permeated each letter. And I really felt that tasted what Thai was transmitting. And that's essentially what Thai does in a teaching. It is transmitting something. The classical Buddhist Zen tradition, you would say, is transmitting the mind or the heart. So it reaches the other person's heart. And I felt very much that was the case by reading his book. And what I was very drawn is that I felt that I had a deep understanding of suffering. And I felt that I had a lot of suffering. And I felt that he had a very deep understanding of human suffering. And that would really attracted me of going to Plum Village. And the way that, because I heard many Buddhist teachings and I practiced in the Vipassana tradition before and I was quite happy. But I felt the way that Thai spoke about that and the way that Thai's approach to practice was so deep, so beautiful that somehow is that there was no other way but to go to Plum Village. So originally I only had enough money to go there for 3 weeks, but I ended up staying. And one of the reasons why I stayed was not just Thai, but it was also the sense of community. And there was a very clear sense of brotherhood, and that I have never experienced in that same beautiful way. So that would really attracted me. And when I saw the monks and nuns being together, I saw there was so much harmony, that there was this real sense of community that is extremely rare.
Yeah. Um, and that certainly seems to be a real strength of the Plum Village traditions, the community amongst the monastics and also amongst the lay sanghas around the world. And so then after meeting Thai and getting involved, could you tell us a bit about how the practice helped you in your own life? You've mentioned there was suffering and looking for a way out, as it were.
Yes. I think the first element is that before I encountered the practice, I felt there was no solution to the problem, let's say, the problem of life. There was no solution. And I felt I could not do anything about my condition, whatever that would be, that I just had to bear it. And that's the lot one is dealt with, and you just have to bear it. When I started to practice, that really changed. I felt I could begin to do something. And it was more like an intuition, because when I started the practice, it really felt like somebody gave me a map and I had a compass and I had to find my way. This is suffering and you want to go to transformation, but it's not very clear. So you need to use the compass. It really felt like that. There was the Buddhist teaching, and this is suffering, and that's the transformation of suffering. But somehow you have to go on this journey and you need to use the compass. So what I felt that the practice is very much that compass. So you got a map, you got the teachings, and you got your practice, which is the compass. So, and I felt that made the whole difference, because I felt I could do something about my suffering. I could do something about my life. And my life actually changed dramatically, from feeling I'm imprisoned in a system and the only thing I can aspire is to work, try to get money, etc., to everything is possible. And the kind of sense of freedom and opening of heart was just beyond anything I ever could conceive of. That, and again, as I mentioned before, that doesn't mean it was easy, because obviously there is suffering, and as I practice, I become much more aware of my suffering. But I also become more aware that it is suffering. It doesn't always mean that it's my suffering, although I may be experiencing the suffering, but that there is suffering, and that suffering may be something more universal than a kind of individual sense of suffering. Nevertheless, it means that I have to practice with that. Maybe universal, but I still need to deal with it. So I feel that's what makes the big difference about the possibility of working skillfully, being nourishing my mind and my heart, understanding the Thai teachings or the Buddhist teachings, and getting a clear sense that there is a path that we can walk, that I can walk, and there's a path of transformation. So I feel that is a very a good sense, and I feel that I can do something about my suffering, which before I felt that there was nothing. I just need to bear with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a very powerful realization, kind of empowering realization, having some agency, maybe we could call it, over our state of mind and our level of suffering and happiness. So as I was saying in the introduction, we're talking today on the 29th of April 2020, which will probably be known as the Corona year or something like that in the future. With this crisis, a lot of people are experiencing different or stronger emotional states of worry and anxiety. Some people have said it's like a low-level anxiety, but it's always kind of there. It's more elevated than usual, or even stronger feelings of despair, or also anger about the situation. So I wondered if there's anything you could share with us that might help all of us listeners to practice with strong emotions, particularly the ones that we experience as challenging, like fear.
There was a friend who teaches mindfulness who said that what the emotions are asking for is to be felt. So what our emotions are asking for is to be felt. And I thought that was a very nice way of putting the aim of our practice, which essentially means to be able to embrace our experience. So there's two elements I find. One is practicing mindfulness in order to nurture mindfulness and to develop mindfulness. But then once mindfulness is developed, the other role of mindfulness is to embrace whatever is happening right in this moment. To bring into light of awareness whatever emotion is going on. And then there is a background to why our emotions are, what kind of emotions we are experiencing. And so it's important to understand that background. They don't come out of the blue. Suddenly I have this emotion, although it may feel like it comes out of the blue. But, suffering manifests when the conditions are sufficient. So in a sense, it's like a reading of what is going on inside. A situation reveals what's going on inside. So it's nothing, we may not like what we're feeling, most likely. It may be very unpleasant. But in a sense, it's there. There is a reason why it's there. It's not that anybody is suddenly dump this stuff on you. It's already there. There's no mistake about that. And the other question is how we relate to what is going on. And normally I tend to relate in a very conditioned, very habitual, my habit energy. I have habit energy in relationship to anger, fear. So normally it's a territory that very rarely do I embrace with mindfulness. Very rarely. Because very rarely do I have first the opportunity to experience that. The situation is revealing fear, anxiety, anger, and there's habitual ways of, are you watering your anger or are you experiencing anger? And you have no control over that experience. Are you experiencing fear or you're watering fear? So there's a distinction. I feel fear and I don't know why I feel fear, and I don't understand why I'm feeling fear. Or the other thing, I am nurturing fear by reading the news and getting all worked up and getting overwhelmed. So there's two things. Either I stop watching the fear if I recognize that's what's happening, or there is fear and I cannot do anything about it. So I need to develop the capacity to embrace fear by being mindful. That's the same with any other type of emotion. So ideally, what one is trying to do is use the practice, develop the practice in order to really experiencing any emotion or mental formation that arises without trying to change, manipulate it, repress it, or suppress it. So that's why this is a training. It's a training, and that's why in Buddhism and the Buddha talked about the Eightfold Noble Path, because this is not a linear practice. I do A, and then from A goes to B, and then from B it goes to C. That is not like that. A has to be connected to B, to C, to D, all at the same time, ideally. So our practice is not a linear practice. It's a multiple it's a multiplicity of practices. So we need to get a sense of what are we nurturing and what are we not nurturing, what practices are we developing and what needs to be developed. So it's a path. That's one of the reasons why I basically chose to become a monk at that time, because I felt this is an opportunity for me to really practice mindfulness. The same as if you go on a retreat. Being on a retreat, hopefully, it is an opportunity for you to develop the practice. That's where you need to do. Don't wait, as Tai says, don't wait until the suffering is there and then try to practice, because you won't have any inner resources. So if I don't have enough resources, let me try to pause the button of suffering and let me try to see how I can be skillful enough. And sometimes we need to pause the suffering. I can't deal with you now because I don't have the capacity to deal. That would be the most skillful way of dealing with suffering. And then when I have the capacity and the space, then I can work with it. So it's very much understanding what our relationship with whatever it is, with our suffering. What is the relationship with it? And how to be skillful in relationship to it. That's just the introduction.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I think I certainly recognise that the habitual patterns are stronger during the crisis. So what I might normally resort to as a sort of default mode under stress is a bit bigger than usual under normal levels of stress. So in some ways there might be more opportunity to see the patterns because it's kind of enlarged.
Yeah. And also another thing, we obviously often don't have a choice. Why am I here and I'm not experiencing much suffering? And other people experience a lot of suffering at the same time, where sometimes I experience a lot of suffering and other people may not be. Why is that? So we don't often have any choice. So by not having choice, the choice you have is just to be with it and embrace what is going on. So if you're feeling very distraught about it, try to see why is it that you're feeling very distraught? What is the conditions that are making that suffering actually bigger than what it maybe actually is? So this is an opportunity because you have no other choice, but you have the choice to begin to work skillfully with it. And I feel that is where the door, as Tai says, the way in is out. The way out is in. That is the key, because I may complain about the situation outside, and I'm the first one that doesn't. But that's not the way I'm going to go out. I need to come back to myself and begin this relationship with my situation, with my mind, with my emotion, with my fear, with my despair. This is where your primary relationship is dedicated to. This is what one's work is about, although it may be not pleasant at all.
Yeah, thank you. You've mentioned retreat, and we've had to cancel quite a lot of the Plum Village UK retreats that were happening in May and the early part of the summer. And then some of us are kind of on a retreat if we're maybe working from home or not able to work. And perhaps spending more time on our own than usual. And then other people have suddenly been thrown into being with their partners or their families 24/7 for however many weeks it's going to be. So they might have much less chance to practice. So do you have any ideas or advice as to how we could use either scenario as an opportunity to practice?
So I think on the first example, one has a bit more choice than the second situation. So I think we should recognize that and do our best to use it in the best way possible. And for myself, I mean, my challenge is not to do just to fall into habit energy. So I mean, if my habit energy personally is about doing, exploring, doing less, or doing more slowly, or doing more consciously. So that's my challenge. So recognizing what is my habit energy in the first instance. For the second situation, again, I don't have a choice. The interesting thing, I mean, it depends how you are reacting. Each person may react to a situation to a higher or lesser degree, and that is saying something about what kind of seeds they are getting triggered inside. And some seeds, there's a quality of suffering that one feel is more like closer to compost, that I can work with it. As Thai uses the word compost, and with compost you can make flowers. Maybe the other quality of suffering is more like rubbish, is not really compost yet, and then you're going to suffer more. So there's not necessarily a clear way out with that, because it takes time to understand my suffering, and they are suffering at different levels. Some is more composted, and some is much more raw. And behind that is more, let's say, raw, there may be other elements that I don't yet understand. So that's why I feel the most helpful thing is, can you bring a continuity of practice? Can you bring an element of practice to your daily life where you feel that suffering has less intensity, whether you're getting annoyed with someone you're living to, or you're with, or you're feeling trapped, I don't know, whatever the situation may be. Can you come down and come back to your breath? Can you stop? Can you come back to your breath, even if it's just a few seconds, just to begin to diminish the intensity of the challenges that you're feeling? Because at this point, that challenge is too raw. It's not compost yet. And that means that there's hardly any space in my mind. I'm just getting overwhelmed by it. So it's good to say, I'm feeling overwhelmed by this situation. My heart has no space for this. In a way, it's quite a humbling experience, because that is an Achilles heel, as it were. Those are the elements that are showing actually how raw I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is where I'm very raw. This is where it's very painful. This is where I feel deeply challenged. But you don't know the ingredients of that yet. You have no capacity yet. So it's good to say that is the very raw experience of suffering. I don't have the skill. I don't understand it yet. But what I do know is that by letting myself be pulled away by it is not going to help. So just come back again. If you can use the practice, even as walking or whatever, just to come back. It's not going to change the suffering so much, but what it is going to change is you're beginning to ground yourself. So it doesn't make any sense to deal with the suffering in the middle of suffering. What it makes more sense is to try to come back and establish a small foundation of mindfulness practice, a small foundation of mindfulness, and then slowly things may change in a kind of mysterious way, because it's like sitting meditation. Sometimes in sitting, you just come back and you come back to your breathing, and somehow there's some transformation happening and you don't really know why that is. That's how I felt as a monk. Often I feel that there's transformation happening, but if you ask me what transformation, I wouldn't tell you what it is. The only thing I know, that is transformation that's happening. And the same with suffering. I know there's suffering happening. I haven't got a clue or what is going on, but I know that there's suffering happening. So that's a start. That is a key already. So in a way, it's actually develop a lot of compassion and loving kindness towards yourself, because to recognize this is a very difficult situation. This is a very painful situation. And I feel the pain. Just feel the pain. Let it actually really feel it. And if it brings tears, or then just let it be there, because I'm fighting against it. So in a way, it's not drowning, but it's not resisting, not fighting against it. We kind of try to find our relationship to it and a way. So it's an opportunity to find a way. So suffering is there. We recognize it. This is where it is. You have no escape. Just be with it. Can I be with it? You are with it, regardless of you like it or not.
Yeah.
But then how can I shift a little bit the view of it and the relationship with it? So then it becomes a bit more, there's different aspects to how I relate to it.
Yeah. Lots of need for self-compassion, for sure. So we've been talking for about half an hour, and there's lots of wonderful things to reflect on there, I think. Very useful things that you've said. Might you have a simple mindfulness in daily life during the crisis tip? Say if we are busier than normal, or maybe have less time to decide upon our own practice schedule than usual, something we could fit in, you could share with us.
Well, I think the first element is how we nourish our mind. So there's many ways to nourish our mind and our body. So I don't know what people's situation is, but for me, going in nature, even if it's outside of the garden, is a very helpful way to nourish my body. And then I have to nurture my mind. So I find that doing things that nurture my mind and listening, for instance, to Dharma talks or reading something inspiring, we need to bring up the spirit up. We don't want to let the spirit go down. We want to uplift ourselves, and we want to motivate ourselves, and we want to be clear about what goals do we want, what is the direction and the intention of what are our intentions and our direction. Bearing in mind that there's things we can do, things we cannot do in terms of what's going on, but we can still maintain that kind of clearer direction of where I want my mind to go towards. So I think that establishing that is probably an important thing. And there are very simple practices. I think the most important for me, the practice is the one that brings joy, and the other one that makes sure that there is a little bit of quality of stopping or being mindful. And for instance, I like this instrument.
Ah.
So I often use it as a way to gauge whether I am stopping or not. I have talked sometimes about in retreats, like when I have a shower or I brush my teeth or go to the toilet, I use this. I have one for 3 minutes just to practice stopping. So while this is lasting, I try not to get lost in thinking or lost in what I'm doing, but I'm trying to remain as present as possible.
Mm.
So it's tools that we can bring in to our daily life that are simple, that kind of gives us as a reminder. And of course, on our computer, there's the mindfulness bell, so we can download the mindfulness bell. So it's very much about establishing a kind of, like an artist has different tools that he uses for his art. So we are kind of the same. We need to discover different tools. It may be sewing, it may be singing, it may be dancing, it may be walking. So the creativity, there's a lot of spectrum of creativity. So where we feel this energy, this clear sense of energy that's flowing, that could be your way to nourish yourself. So for having that nourishing body and mind, and then also making some space where there is a clear sense of that there's a practice there for you, that you notice that you're stopping, there's a quality of mindfulness every now and again, and that becomes a kind of the direction of our mind. Yeah.
That sounds wonderful. I love the hourglass. Yes, because I use the mindfulness bell on my phone, the Plum Village app one, and then I set my phone timer for regularly for just a 1 minute stopping. But an hourglass, and something very lovely about that, and
it's visual. I think the
yeah.
important thing that is something that's visual.
Yes, yeah.
And that helps.
Pouring down, yeah. It's lovely. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say or share with our community?
Well, the only reality that now we may, that this is going to change, obviously. We don't know what direction, but things will change. So we need to appreciate whatever it is that we have now as much as we can. If there's good conditions, we need to obviously appreciate it and not follow a habit energy. And I'm saying that to myself. I'm not just saying that to you.
Yeah.
Appreciate what the space I have and not just get carried away by habit energy. And if it's a very challenging situation, recognize that this is challenging now. It will change. There will be a moment when it will be less challenging. So what if I'm feeling the crunch? What can I really do in this situation? Because is telling me a lot about myself. This is very interesting, important information about myself. And how can I work with that? How can I embrace it?
Yeah. That's been certainly very useful for me, and I'm sure very useful to anyone watching or listening. So thank you very much. We've also got quite a lot of online Plum Village UK practice opportunities now with some of our other wonderful Dharma teachers, which you will receive in your newsletters and you can find on our website. And on the 17th of May, which is a Sunday, we have a UK-wide day of mindfulness with some of our Dharma teachers contributing on a similar topic. It's on how to develop no fear during the crisis, which is an expression Thai uses. So our website is plumvillage.uk, and you can find a lot more information there. And thank you very much, Michael, for with everyone. And soon we'll be with everyone listening. Thank you.